The desert is burning, not with flames, though there are plenty of those on the horizon, but with heat, the kind of heat that bends light, shakes the air, and makes every distant shape look untrustworthy. It warps sound, too, stretching the thunder of artillery into a long, growling echo that seems to roll in from everywhere at once. A Morris C8 quad, sand-caked, dented and straining, claws its way up a shallow ridge. Its engine growls in protest, an overworked, loyal animal refusing to quit. Behind it, attached by thick, jolting tow ropes, is its burden, a crippled 25-pounder gun howitzer, one wheel shattered by enemy fire. On the flat desert below, German shells tear into the ground with obscene precision. The gun crew sprints alongside the vehicle, half for speed, half for survival. Their boots kick up plumes of dust. One man stumbles, picks himself up, and keeps running. The quad jerks. Its wheels dig into the sand. The driver, sweat pouring beneath his helmet, forces the gear shift forward with both hands. The vehicle lurches again, strains, growls, pushes. A shell detonates close enough to shower the men with sand and hot metal fragments. But the Morris C8 keeps pulling. It is anonymous, uncelebrated. No glossy propaganda posters were made of it. No boys dreamed of it. No nation lionized it. But here, in the worst moment of these men's lives, it is doing what it always did, saving people by moving the war forward. The howitzer finally crests the ridge. The crew dives behind it, breathless. The quad halts, its engine ticking like something alive and exhausted. The battery commander shouts, "Gun into action!" Within seconds, the crew swings into drilled perfection. Wheels chalked, carrots dug, sight levels checked. The enemy fire hasn't stopped. But now, thanks to one stubborn machine, they can answer back. A forgotten hero in a desert of legends. The camera pulls back. The ridge becomes a speck. The men become dust shadows. The quad becomes a moving dot among 1,000 other dots that kept the war alive. And this is where its story becomes strange. Because while the deserts of North Africa produced some of the most iconic machines of World War II, the Panzer III, the Grants and Shermans, the rugged Bren carriers, and above all, the mythical Spitfires dueling over El Alamein, one vehicle was everywhere, yet remembered nowhere. The Morris C8 was there when the British Army made its last desperate stands. It was there when they counterattacked. It was there when they broke the Axis lines. Every single one of those movements depended on artillery, and artillery depended on tractors. And the tractor, almost always, was the quad. And yet when people speak of the war, they picture tanks, fighters, battleships, machines built to kill. Very few picture the things built to carry, tow, haul, drag, lift, pull, and endure. The machines that won glory were the ones that destroyed. The machines that won wars were the ones that kept people alive. And none did it more quietly than Morris C8. Why the world forgot the machine that carried the war. Every generation chooses what it remembers. Some memories are loud, the scream of a Stuka, the thunder of a Tiger tank, the shine of a P-51 Mustang rising into the sun. Others are quiet, the grumble of a 70-horsepower Morris engine, the sound of sand against steel, the whine of a winch pulling a bogged-down gun free. These sounds did not make it into recruitment posters. They didn't sell war bonds. They weren't dramatic enough for newsreels. Tanks are remembered because they defined the silhouette of the battlefield. Bombers are remembered because they lit the night sky.
Fighters are remembered because children turned them into toys. But logistics, vehicles like the Morris 8 lived in the margins. Their heroism was routine. Their missions were essential but not glamorous. They lacked the spectacle that turned machinery into mythology. The result is simple. The world remembers the sword, but it forgets the arm that lifted it. A machine that moved the war while staying out of sight. The quad was everywhere. It served in France, 1940, the North African Campaign, Sicily, Italy, the Burma Front, Normandy, Northwest Europe, post-war conflicts from Korea to Malaya. Its crews relied on it, not because it was fast, not because it was beautiful, not because it was adored, but because it always worked. It crawled up mountains, clawed through mud, survived monsoon rot, endured North African heat, and carried men and ammunition where tanks could not go. Its designers didn't set out to make a legend. They set out to build a tool, one that took punishment, one that hauled the single most important weapon of the British Empire in World War II, the 25-pounder. Without artillery, infantry could not hold. Tanks could not advance. Whole fronts could collapse. Without the quad, the 25-pounder could not move. And without movement, artillery is useless. This is the quiet logic of warfare, rarely acknowledged, always true. And it is the reason the Morris C8 deserves a story. The strange fate of an indispensable vehicle. The quad story is not one of spectacular moments. It is one of relentless presence. It shows up in photographs almost accidentally, slightly out of frame, half buried in sand, masked in camouflage netting, dwarfed by the massive guns it pulled. It appears in diaries and dispatches as shorthand, tractor, quad, or simply FAT, Field Artillery Tractor. Rarely does a crewman stop to describe it in detail, not because they didn't value it, but because it was always there, like the sun, like dust, like the never-ending supply of things that needed towing. And over time, the world mistook invisibility for insignificance. This could imply why it faded from collective memory, because it never produced a Normandy-level headline or a pure six-scale myth. Yet based on what we know from operational reports, soldiers depended on it with almost a superstitious trust. They describe breakdowns as events worth noting precisely because they were so rare. It wasn't a miracle machine. It was a dependable one. And dependability is rarely the stuff of legend. A war won not by glory, but by grit. The quad represents a truth military historians repeat, but popular memory often ignores. World War II is decided more by movement than by firepower. What good is a tank if its fuel never arrives? What good is a gun if its crew can't keep up? What good is victory if the supplies necessary to hold it get lost on muddy roads? When the British Army mechanized its artillery, it rewired how it fought. Surprise, flexibility, tempo. These became possible only when guns could move fast. The quad made that possible. And unlike tanks, which dominated headlines, or aircraft, which shaped national pride, the quad's impact came to reducing delays, preventing losses, enabling advances, and averting collapses. It prevented disasters. It multiplied the strength of the infantry. It served every hour of the campaign, not only in dramatic moments. And because it didn't look threatening, sleek, or heroic, history looked the other way. Returning to the desert, the moment that defines it. Back to 1942. The desert wind has picked up. A death storm moves across the horizon like a living creature. The men brace themselves as the particles sting their skin like 1,000 needles. The quad's engine, still idling, coughs once, twice, then steadies. The crew stands by the 25-pounder, adjusting the trail legs, leveling the sights. One gunner slabs the dust off the vehicle's hood affectionately. He doesn't have to say it, the gesture says enough. Another shell lands far off. The commander raises his hand. Fire! The 25-pounder roars. Its recoil shakes the ground. The battle turns. And if you zoom in, really zoom in past the smoke, past the noise, past the chaos,
a military power built on old bones. To understand the birth of the Morris C8, we must step back, years before the desert winds of North Africa, before Dunkirk, before the world ignited. The story begins in the mid-1930s, at a time when the British Empire still stretched around the globe, yet its military machine was quietly rusting beneath the weight of complacency. Britain had won the Great War, but victory had not brought preparedness. Budgets were slashed, doctrines froze, mechanization crept forward at a cautious, almost timid pace. While Germany rearmed under Hitler at breakneck speed, and the Soviet Union pushed massive experiments in mechanized warfare, the British Army still relied heavily on horses to pull its guns. Photographs from as late as 1938 show columns of Royal Artillery units on muddy roads, their 18-pounders and 4.5-inch howitzers pulled by 6-horse teams, just as they had been in 1916. The world was changing. Britain was not. But inside the halls of the War Office, a quiet revolution was forming, a recognition that the next war would not wait for horses, and that artillery, more than any other branch, could not afford to be slow. 2. The search for a new way to move guns. In the early 1930s, a trickle of officers and engineers began pushing for a fully mechanized artillery system. The argument was simple: speed wins battles. Guns that can move quickly can respond to breakthroughs, escape encirclement, reinforce thin lines, or exploit sudden opportunities. But the British Army faced a dilemma. They needed a vehicle that could pull heavy guns across broken ground, carry ammunition, transport that entire gun crew, survive rain, snow, mud, heat, and require minimal maintenance. And it needed to be mass-produced by a civilian industry that had never attempted such a thing at scale. Several prototypes and army tractors were tested: Carriere, Guy, Scammell, but each had flaws. Some were too slow, some were too fragile, others were too expensive or hard to build quickly. It was clear that the army needed not just a tractor, but the right tractor, a machine simple enough to build by the thousands, tough enough for the front lines, cheap enough for wartime budgets, and reliable enough to become the backbone of the British way of war. That is the moment when the story intersects with a company whose name, at the time, was synonymous not with military power, but with practical, dependable civilian motoring. 3. Morris Motors, the unexpected giant. In the interwar years, Morris Motors Limited was not a small workshop or a fringe player. It was a titan. Founded by William Morris, later Lord Nuffield, the company had risen from a bicycle repair shop to one of the largest automotive manufacturers in Britain. By 1930, Morris Motors controlled a commercial empire including Morris Motors Cars, Morris Commercial Cars, MG, Wolseley, Riley later, and large portions of the British automotive supply chain. If Ford defined American motoring, Morris defined British motoring. Its factories in Cowley and Birmingham were massive, highly organised and capable of high-volume production, exactly what the War Office desperately needed. But Morris Motors also brought something else to the table: a philosophy of rugged practicality. Their vehicles were known not for flash or speed, but for being dependable, repairable, and affordable. William Morris himself believed in machines that ordinary people could understand and fix. His engineers followed the same creed. This mindset, simplicity first, reliability second, elegance last, would shape the creation of the Morris C8 more than any battlefield requirement, and it would prove to be exactly the right instinct. 4. Britain's pre-war industrial landscape, a nation at a crossroads. To comprehend the importance of Morris Motors' contribution, we need to appreciate Britain's industrial reality in the mid-1930s. Unlike Germany, which structured its rearmament around state-dominated industrial policy, or the United States, which possessed massive peacetime manufacturing power, Britain had fragmented industries, aging factories, a skilled but thin labour force, and an economy still recovering from the Great Depression. The government needed companies that could transition rapidly from civilian to military production without rebuilding entire industries from scratch. Morris Motors fit that requirement perfectly. By the mid-1930s, the War Office was quietly contacting and evaluating manufacturers capable of building artillery tractors. The task required firms with large stamping capacity, experience with light trucks, supply chain control, flexible production tiers, and proven reliability. Morris Motors checked every box. Thus began the collaboration that would birth the Morris C8. 5. Strategic doctrine. Why the British Army needed a vehicle like the C8. By 1936, British strategists were piecing together new doctrines based on lessons from the First World War and observations of foreign forces. A few key ideas guided the effort. 1. Artillery must be mobile. The Great War taught the British that static artillery could stop an enemy temporarily, but it couldn't seize initiative or exploit breakthroughs. Mechanized artillery was essential for fast-moving operations. Speed, not size, would define the next war. While Germany was experimenting with heavy tanks, British doctrine emphasized medium speed, well-coordinated forces. Artillery needed to move with infantry and armored brigades, not behind them. Standardization saved lives. The War Office wanted a tractor that could tow different guns, use common parts, and operate across multiple theaters. A standardized tractor meant easier training, easier repairs, and faster deployment. A gun crew should travel with its gun. This principle seemed obvious today, but it was revolutionary at the time. Previously, crews marched or rode separately from their guns. Mechanized warfare demanded that entire units move as one. Wartime production must be fast. With tensions rising in Europe, planners anticipated the need to field thousands of tractors in a short window. Taken together, these principles pointed to a single type of machine, a compact enclosed all-wheel drive artillery tractor that could serve across multiple fronts. A blueprint was forming. Now Morris Motors needed to translate doctrine into steel. 6. The design philosophy. Rugged simplicity. The Morris design team, working closely with the War Office engineers, arrived at a philosophy that became the foundation of the Morris C8. They wanted a vehicle that was simple enough for semi-skilled mechanics, reliable enough to survive combat abuse, cheap enough for mass production, strong enough to tow a fully loaded 25-pounder, light enough to avoid bogging down, flexible enough to operate in deserts, mud, snow, and jungles. This design shaped every bracket, hinge, and bolt. 1. A cab-over-engine layout. To reduce size and weight while maximizing interior space, Morris engineers placed the cab over the engine, an unusual design for the time. This shortened the wheelbase, improved maneuverability, and allowed room for crew and ammunition. 2. Simplicity over power. Instead of pursuing a more powerful or complex engine, Morris elected a tried and tested 4-cylinder engine, delivering roughly 70 horsepower. Not impressive on a racetrack, but rugged, dependable, and easy to repair. 3. Standardized components. Parts were intentionally shared with other Morris vehicles. This lowered costs, simplified logistics, and ensured that mechanics could easily obtain replacements. 4. High ground clearance and 4x4 drive. The C8 needed to go where trucks couldn't. High clearance, short wheelbase, and 4x4 drive ensured the machine could cross rough terrain. 5. Weather protection. Unlike open-wheel tractors, the C8 featured enclosed body to protect crews from dust storms, cold, or tropical rain.
vital in global deployments. Most engineers repeatedly emphasized a single idea: if a soldier can't fix it with basic tools, it's too complicated. This design creed shaped every bracket, hinge and bolt. 7. The quiet birth of a wartime workhorse. By 1938, prototypes of the future C8 were undergoing trials. While some details remain obscure, trackers were scattered during wartime. What we know suggests that early tests impressed observers with the vehicle's traction, compactness, and ease of operation. Reports describe it as unremarkable to look at, but remarkably capable in the field, which could imply why the War Office warmed to it so quickly. By early 1939, the path was set. Morris Motors would mass-produce the vehicle Britain needed most. A vehicle that would soon pull the most important gun of the British Empire, a vehicle that would serve on every major front of the war, a vehicle that would become known simply as the Quad. 8. A legend takes shape, quietly. There were no newsreels celebrating its adoption, no grand unveiling, no proud speeches. The Morris C8 entered British service in early 1939, not with a roar, but with a hum, its modest 400 and turning over for the first time in uniform. It was not beautiful, it was not glamorous, but it was ready. Ready for the muddy roads of France, ready for the sands of Libya, ready for the frozen rivers of Europe, ready for the jungles of Burma, ready for every place British gunners would fight and every moment they would need their guns to be where the enemy did not expect them. And as tensions in Europe erupted into open war, the Quad rolled out of the Morris factories. By the hundreds, then by the thousands, a quiet legend born not from ambition or innovation for its own sake.
The hidden complexity behind a simple machine. At first glance, the Morris C8 Fat does not strike the observer as a complicated piece of wartime engineering. It lacks the theatrical presence of a Tiger tank, the sleek confidence of a Spitfire, or the brutal functionality of a Sherman. The 8C is squat, boxy, almost awkward. It looks like something a farmer might build out of leftover tractor parts. But this impression is misleading, shaped more by the Morris C8's lack of fame than by its actual technical merit. Under the corrugated metal skin, the C8 was a carefully calculated machine, built not for beauty, but for a specific doctrine, a specific set of wartime realities, and a specific battlefield role that demanded absolute mechanical trustworthiness. This section peels back those metal plates and examines the beating heart of the C8, its engine, its chassis, its strange but effective cab-over-engine layout, and the way each variant evolved to answer the needs of a global war. The core mechanical philosophy. The design mandate can be summarized in 4 values: reliability, simplicity, ease of maintenance, maximum towing efficiency for the 25-pounder system. There was no room for unnecessary sophistication, no room for delicate components, no room for anything a muddy-handed mechanic couldn't repair in the field with a hammer, a wrench, and sometimes just a bit of profanity. British engineers understood the brutal truth. In a mechanized war stretching across deserts, jungles, mountains, and frozen fields, a broken vehicle wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a strategic failure. A towed artillery piece that couldn't be moved couldn't fire. A gun that couldn't fire couldn't support the infantry. And infantry without artillery became vulnerable. So, the Morris C8 didn't have to be glamorous. It had to be dependable. That mindset shaped every bolt, every weld, every mechanical choice. The engine, the Morris EH power plant. At the heart of the Morris C8 was the Morris EH engine, a 6-cylinder, 3.5-liter petrol engine, producing roughly 70 horsepower. By modern standards, this is laughably small. Your average family car today has more power.
But in the wartime context, the EH engine was a masterpiece of balance. Why the EH engine worked so well? Low-end torque, critical for towing artillery over uneven terrain. Straightforward construction. Soldiers could disassemble and repair it without factory facilities. Good tolerance for heat and dust. Based on field imports from the Middle East and North Africa, the engine performed adequately even when choked with sand, a testament to its resilience. Cooling and air filtration. The desert campaigns nearly killed countless Allied vehicles, but the C-8's cooling system, while not perfect, held up better than many contemporaries. Some units added improvised sand filters, sometimes just layers of damp cloth to keep dust from clogging the carburetor. Based on field logs from 1941 to 1942, it appears many crews had their own rituals for protecting the engine, from plugging gas with grease-soaked rags to rigging makeshift mesh screens. These aren't official design features, but they demonstrate the practical realities Morris engineers knew they had to anticipate. IV. Chassis and suspension, built to survive abuse. The C-8 was built on a shortened and strengthened version of the Morris CS 1130 truck chassis. It incorporated 4x4 wheel drive, a sturdy ladder frame construction, semi-elliptic leaf springs front and rear. Why this mattered? Leaf springs were not sophisticated, but they were nearly indestructible. A broken spring can be patched, strapped, or even temporarily replaced with a piece of hardwood in emergencies. Crews in the field actually did this. There are anecdotal accounts of troops in Burma carving temporary replacement leaves from teak planks. Could a wooden leaf spring really work? Based on the mechanical simplicity of leaf spring systems, yes. For short distances and at low speeds, such improvisations could keep the tractor and its gun moving long enough to reach a service depot. This speaks to the broader theme. The C-8 wasn't built to avoid damage. It was built to survive it. V1. The gab-over engine layout. Strange, but brilliant. One of the most distinctive features of the C-8 Fat was the cab-over engine design, placing the driver and commander directly above and slightly forward of the engine. Advantages of the COE system. Shorter overall vehicle length allowed easier maneuvering when towing artillery, more internal space for crew and ammunition, better forward visibility, crucial in poor terrain, more weight over the front axle, increasing stability when towing. Disadvantages. The cab got hot, sometimes extremely hot. Engine access required removing panels from inside the cab. Noise levels were high and vibration constant. Veteran testimonies from North Africa mentioned feeling the engine's heat through their boots, turning the cab into a rolling oven during daytime marches. This is consistent with the realities of COE layouts, especially in the 1940s before noise and heat insulation became standard. Yet, despite these drawbacks, the design worked exceptionally well for a tractor whose primary job was to move artillery quickly and precisely. VII. Body variants, Mark I, Mark II, Mark III. The Morris C-8 evolved continuously through the war. While the exact breakdown can vary slightly by source, the generally accepted development path is as follows. Mark I, early production. Simplified body. Open gunner seating arrangement at the back. Early models still ironing out issues in suspension and weight distribution. Mark II, refined layout. Improved crew compartment. Better storage solutions for ammunition. Adjusted rear compartment for the 25-pounder gun crew. Slight improvements to engine accessibility. Mark III, standardized wartime model. The most common and iconic C-8 Fat variant. Fully enclosed crew compartment. Revised mechanical components for easier mass production. Enhanced towing frame. Mark III variant represents the classic silhouette most historians associate with the Morris C8 Fat. Why the variants matter? Each redesign addressed specific battlefield lessons. For example, the transition from the Mark I to Mark II included subtle improvements based on reports from the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, during the 1940 France campaign, where mud, poor road conditions, and rapid retreats exposed weaknesses. While detailed BEF reports vary, logistics notes from the period consistently emphasized the need for improved internal storage and faster gun deployment, issues addressed in the Mark II. Again, this is an example of inference based on available evidence rather than direct documentation of the redesigned rationale. V1. Towing capability. The 25-pounder system. The Morris C8 was created for a single sacred purpose, to move the legendary 25-pounder artillery gun and its associated ammunition limmer, or the number 27 trailer. The complete system included the Morris C8 Fat tractor, the 25-pounder gun howitzer, the ammunition limmer carried cells and charges, a 6 to 10-man gun crew, depending on mission. This system was the backbone of British and Commonwealth field artillery. The 8C needed to start reliably, navigate rough terrain, position the gun precisely, reverse with finesse, brake effectively even when towing several tons, and it did. What made it effective? High torque at low RPMs, tight turning radius due to cab-over-engine layout, good ground clearance, well-matched gear ratios. Artillery units valued the 8C not for speed, but for steadiness. While its top speed was modest, around 50 kilometers per hour on good roads, this was more than sufficient for artillery convoy movement. VIII. Interoperability with other equipment. The 8C wasn't just a tractor, it was part of a broader mechanical ecosystem. It could also tow the 17-pounder anti-tank gun in emergency or limited use cases, field supply trailers, or light anti-aircraft guns. However, its optimal performance was always with the 25-pounder system. Based on available fuel accounts, towing heavier guns was possible, but placed significant strain on the engine and braking system. Crews generally avoided doing so unless
A chill mist clings to the riverbanks. British gunners scramble beside their 25-pounder, boots slapping against wet soil, breath steaming in the cold morning air. Behind them, a brand new Morris C8 FAT idles, its engine grumbling, the exhaust sending a thin gray ribbon into the sky. The tractor looks almost out of place in this chaos, its paint still fresh, its lines still sharp from the factory floor. A few weeks earlier, it had rolled out of Cowley Works in Oxford. Now it sits barely a mile behind the front line. A gun sergeant slams the rear door shut and shouts, "Mount up! They're breaking through at Mons." The C8 lurches forward, towing the 25-pounder in limber as the gunners cling to the vehicle's rails. Behind them, artillery booms, some British, more German. The road ahead is choked with refugees, Bren carriers, trucks, motorcycles, and marching infantry. Luftwaffe bombers growl somewhere above the cloud cover. This is the Morris C8's baptism by fire. 1. The Morris C8's First War, the BEF, and the rapid collapse of France. The Morris C8 was introduced only shortly before the outbreak of the Second World War. By the time the British Expeditionary Force shipped to France in late 1939, early batches of the C8 were just beginning to reach artillery units. Many BEF formations still used older tractors, Morris CDSWs, Guy Quad Ants, or even horses in limited cases, but the C8 represented the future. Although detailed allocation records from early 1940 vary, surviving war diaries show that a significant portion of the BEF's field artillery regiments received their very first C8 during the Phoney War, when the front was quiet and training was still possible. Crews approached the C8 with cautious optimism.
It was modern, compact, and clearly designed for the 25-pounder. Companies assigned to the 1st and 2nd Infantry Divisions practiced rapid deployment drills, learning how to unlimber the gun, position the tractor, and establish fire missions within minutes. Several gunners later reflected, through memoirs, post-war interviews, or regimental histories, that the C8 felt like the right tool for the job. It started easily in cold weather, handled the rough French farm roads well, and carried ample ammunition. And then May 10th arrived, and the BEF was thrust into a mechanized disaster unfolding with unprecedented speed. 2. The German breakthrough, testing the C8 under fire. When German panzer divisions punched through the Ardennes and reached the Meuse, the BEF's orderly defensive plan collapsed. Artillery units were suddenly required to move constantly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, to avoid encirclement. The Morris C8, still new to most gunners, was immediately stress-tested in ways no training exercise had prepared them for. 1. Mobility under chaos. Roads became nightmarish bottlenecks. Thousands of civilian refugees mixed with British and French columns. Vehicles moved in fits and starts. Luftwaffe bombers' strafing runs turned quiet country lanes into death traps. In this environment, the C8's compact size and tight turning radius proved invaluable. Larger tractors struggled to maneuver. Some older types overheated or broke suspension components on rutted roads. The C8, by contrast, often, quote, kept going unless physically blocked, according to one after-action report. 2. Towing under pressure. The 25-pounder was frequently called upon to execute firing missions while on retreat. Gun crews might unlimber the gun beside a farmhouse, fire several rounds to delay advancing German infantry, then rapidly limber up and move again. In these shoot and scoot scenarios, the C8's engine torque and simple transmission were mated well suited. Gunners learned to coordinate movements almost wordlessly, developing a rhythm: halt, unlimber, load, fire, limber, mount, and move. But the strain was immense. Some early production Cs lacked refinements introduced later in the Mark II and III models. Crews reported issues such as brakes overheating on long road withdrawals, minor carburetor blockages, starter motors failing after continuous use. None of these were catastrophic, and many were fixed on the roadside by overworked rainy mechanics, but they foreshadowed the lessons Morris designers would implement later in the war. 3. The retreat to Dunkirk, a world collapsing around the C8. As the British Expeditionary Force withdrew toward the coast, the situation became increasingly desperate. Artillery units were often the last to leave a position, firing until German infantry or armor approached rifle range. Scenes from regimental diaries made a vivid picture. C8s towing guns across fields churned to mud by days of rain. Gunners firing into the last moment, then racing to limber the gun while bullets snapped overhead. Columns lineated by burning villages as crews navigated nighttime roads only lit by dimmed headlights. Some accounts describe C8s reversing at speed with remarkable agility, something that tractors with a conventional cab layout struggled with. The driver's elevated position over the engine gave excellent visibility, an advantage repeatedly mentioned in memoirs. The psychological toll. Drivers spoke of exhaustion so severe their legs trembled on the pedals. Gunners slept sitting upright in the rear compartment. Mechanics worked by the dim light of shuttered torches to keep engines running. The Morris C8 was not a glamorous machine. It was never meant to be immortalized in museums, but in these terrible days, it became a lifeline. 4. Abandonment on the beaches, the C8 at Dunkirk. When the evacuation of Dunkirk began on May 26, 1940, the BEF faced an agonizing reality. They could not bring their vehicles home. The order was clear: destroy or disable anything that could not be evacuated: tanks, trucks, carriers, motorcycles, and artillery tractors. This included the brand new Morris C8 FAT. A landscape of mechanical corpses. Photographs from Dunkirk's beaches show lines of abandoned vehicles stretching into the surf. Among them, unmistakably, are FATs. Some overturned, some flooded by rising tides, some burned by their own crews. A few were driven into the sand dunes and set alight. Others had their engines smashed with hammers or drained of oil and run until seized. Some were simply left with their hoods open, vital components removed. Why was the C8 often prioritized for abandonment? At the time, the BEF still considered older tractors like the CDSWs to be more familiar and easier for reservists to maintain. C8, though promising, was still the quote-unquote new machine, and priority for evacuation space, scarce and chaotic, often went to vehicles that could still serve an immediate purpose for rearguard actions. Additionally, some crews reportedly hoped the C8 destruction would at least deny the advancing Wehrmacht a valuable new tractor design. German capture. Some intact or lightly damaged C8s were indeed captured and pressed into German service. Period photos show them repainted in Wehrmacht gray, towing light artillery or used as runabouts or infantry divisions. This suggests that the Germans recognize the vehicle's practicality, even if their documentation on the subject is sparse. 5. Lessons from disaster: how France 1940 shaped the C8's evolution. The BES near-total equipment loss forced British industry into a crash program of rearmament. The early war experience revealed specific design weaknesses in the Mark I version of the C8, issues that would be corrected in later Marks. 1. Improved crude protection and layout. The chaotic movement during the retreat exposed problems with storage, crew seating, and internal layout. Reports pushed Morris to refine the crew area, leading to the more efficient Mark II and Mark III configurations. 2. Mechanical adjustments. Breakdowns encountered during the retreat, especially under sustained road movement, highlighted the need for better brake cooling, more robust suspension components, and improved engine access panels. Morris implemented these changes gradually as production accelerated. 3. The need for mass production. The loss of nearly all BEF equipment meant Britain had to rebuild its entire motorized artillery capability. This necessity influenced the decision to streamline C8 production, simplify some components, and scale up factories. 4. Tactical doctrine shifts. Commanders realized the importance of rapid artillery mobility. The C8's strong performance under fire reinforced emerging doctrine. Artillery must move as fast as infantry. Tractors must be easy to maintain during continuous retreat or advance. Flexibility and reliability outweighed raw power. These insights shaped not just the Morris C8 future, but British artillery doctrine for the rest of the war. 6. The emotional legacy of France, 1940. For a minigunner, the loss of their C8 at Dunkirk was deeply personal. These vehicles had carried them through weeks of error, exhaustion, and constant movement. To destroy them deliberately felt like a betrayal. One sergeant recalled years later that setting fire to his C8 felt like shooting a horse that had carried you through a storm. Based on the emotional tone common in BEF memoirs, such sentiments were widespread, even if not always recorded verbatim. Yet, even in destruction, the C8 proved its worth. Those early days of fire and chaos forged the machine's reputation, not among historians, but among the men who relied on it. Closing reflection. France 1940 nearly erased the Morris C8 from existence. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, were destroyed or captured, but those that survived, whether in British workshops, German units, or rebuilt regiments back home, carried with them the lessons learned in that disastrous